Hi everyone, welcome to chapters 11 and 12 in your text, where we will be talking a little bit about math and writing assessment in the context of special education evaluations. With both the math and writing areas, two of the biggest questions that we'll be asking ourselves are questions in regards to eligibility and also questions for instructional planning or the development of effective interventions for students. So we utilize these assessments to answer the question, does a need exist? And how does the student's performance compare to that of grade level peers? So those norm referenced assessments that are available in each area are very helpful for substantiating that a student has a significant need or a performance problem, and also for giving us information about where the student falls in relation to same age and grade level peers, or where their score would fall on that bell curve or that normal distribution that we've been talking about. Kind of gives us some information about the significance of their performance deficits. On the instructional end of things, we utilize assessment data to outline the student's strengths and weaknesses, as well as to establish their baseline or their present level of performance. And informal measures are really useful for developing those questions and giving us information about both the baseline and the present level, as well as the skills that the child does and does not have, in an effort to focus our interventions and strategies more effectively. Just as we had talked about in the area of reading, there are also sub areas or specific skills that make up the area of mathematics. I'm not going to belabor these, but just be aware that math is a broad area and includes a lot of different individual skills. Some students will struggle across the board with all of these skills, and some will have very isolated needs. So it's important that we use assessment strategies that give us information about their achievement in each of these areas of mathematics so that we can differentiate for those students who may have splinter skills in math, really where they need help and where they are already performing at grade level. Your text does a nice job talking about some recommendation from the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, but overall they talk about this council and their recommendations for students to value math skills, to see relevance and personal benefit to learning and developing good skills in math. Also for students to move away from drill and skill or memorization of basic facts and move toward a very problem solving and solution focused model of mathematics instruction. So definitely refer to your text for the specifics, but that's just kind of a summary of some of the recommendations from this council. This National Council of Teachers of Mathematics additionally recommends that students are actively involved in problem-solving activities, that they utilize strategies like manipulatives, calculators, and computers to solve problems. Again, you see that shift away from memorization and drill and skill, and more toward utilizing strategies and supports to solve problems and perform calculations independently. They also advocate for cooperative learning in pairs and in group situations. There are several standardized tests that are specific to math, so these will be administered in very much the same way as the Wyatt and the KTEA that we've practiced in class. The difference is that the only areas that they measure are relevant to math. So these tests go a little bit deeper into some of those sub areas of math that we saw on the previous slide than the more broad achievement tests that typically will only address math calculation, math reasoning or problem solving, and math fluency. But just be aware that in addition to the broad achievement tests like the Wyatt and the KTEA, that there also are some more standardized specific mathematics tests available. Curriculum-based measurement has applications in the math area as well. CBM, I think, is most utilized in the area of reading, and that's where we usually talk about it most, but it has applications in math as well. It's administered class-wide to large groups of students and provides a good inventory of the skills that are mastered by each student. The results can be graphed just as they can be with reading, and the results are very useful for demonstrating how students are responding to intervention. So just as with the area of reading, CBM in the math context is most useful for screening students and identifying students who might need further assessment or intervention. And it's also great for showing how students are responding to various intervention or instruction strategies. We can also utilize teacher checklists as another method of informal assessment. This can be a very efficient way to gather information about a student's skills, but always think about the implications of both informant procedures and informal techniques when we're gathering information, under those two categories. Just think about the implications of, when we're relying on others to give us information and when we're relying on an informal evaluation procedure. Just be aware of the implications that those two things have for high stakes decision making. They're great in harmony with another strategy or with a whole other assessment plan, but these types of strategies on their own would not be sufficient to make high stakes decisions. Informal inventories just involves really surveying a variety of skills. Again, this is one of those techniques that's considered a mile wide and an inch deep, meaning that it gives us a little bit of information about a lot of different skills. So again, this can be very useful in the assessment process to focus our additional assessments to give us a direction in terms of intervention or program development, but definitely consider the reliability and validity considerations and the implications for high stakes decision making. Error analysis is a strategy that can really be paired with any of the other assessment types that we've talked about. And this really involves looking at the errors that a student has made when they're performing math calculations to try to understand more about the student's process or about how they arrived at their conclusions in an effort to provide more effective interventions. So definitely refer to your text for a more specific explanation of these four error types, but typically students' errors will fall under one of these four categories, and error analysis is a really great strategy to use in tandem with other assessment strategies to get a good idea of the student's skills, and really tells you a lot about their thinking and how they arrived at the answer so that you can be more effective in your interventions. We always want to think about how a child's disability or their weakness in one area could have implications in other areas of the curriculum. I think that's most obvious with reading, but definitely has considerations and applications in math as well. Again, think about math in that broad sense and think about those sub areas of math achievement that we observed on the previous slide. So don't just think about math in terms of problem solving or calculation skills, but really consider early numeracy, number sense types of things, and really consider the broad area of mathematics and how that could have implications for students in areas of the curriculum that rely on things like sequencing and patterning. That can have implications in reading comprehension and a variety of other areas in the curriculum. Writing assessments, this really follows very closely along with what we have just talked about with math, but basically we're trying to answer questions including what are the students' needs and what are their strengths and weaknesses by conducting an assessment in writing. So we're trying to establish that there is a need for specialized intervention and trying to get an idea of where those interventions should focus. Writing also has sub-areas including spelling, handwriting, and composition. Within the area of composition, it has some sub-areas including grammar and mechanics, as well as content, logic, and organization. So just be aware that, again, under that larger area of writing, some students will have very specific needs. in these sub areas where they may be doing well in one and have an isolated need in another, or some students have more global concerns throughout the whole domain. Norm reference tests are very useful in writing to identify areas of difficulty and again substantiate a need for specialized intervention. And they're also great for giving us information about where that student performs in relation to same age and same grade level peers, or they show us where that student lies on that normal curve or that bell curve that we've been discussing. There are a lot of informal techniques that can be utilized to assess a student's writing. Again, they are great for giving us information about a child's skills in a more detailed sense, and it can be great for identifying skills that are mastered or unmastered in the writing curriculum. So informal techniques can have a lot of benefit for the development of IEPs and the monitoring of specific intervention programs. I'll direct you to your text. Definitely read the sections in your text where they talk about language more specifically, but they're going to talk about the difference between expressive and receptive language, and they also go through a nice discussion of the developmental sequence of writing. I want you to consider the developmental sequence of writing when we think about developing or designing interventions for students who are struggling in writing, and also as we're thinking about prioritizing ETR needs or prioritizing skills to address on a student's IEP. With the developmental sequence in mind, thinking about skills that need to come first versus skills that students will acquire later. So just have a familiarity with the developmental sequence and think about that in context of prioritizing ETR needs and developing effective interventions with the developmental sequence in mind. For assessing writing in terms of a standardized evaluation, there are writing specific subtests included on those general or global achievement tests like the Wyatt or the Woodcock-Johnson or the KTEA that will look at things like spelling, sentence structure, essay composition, grammar, mechanics, plot, sequence, theme, all those kinds of things. The Wyatt really has probably the best and most comprehensive evaluation of writing, whereas other instruments like the Woodcock-Johnson really focus more just on fluency and basic composition skills. So often practitioners, myself included, will go outside of those general achievement tests to look at writing because it is such a broad area and it is such a specific skill. There are some good writing specific achievement tests like the test of written language, also referred to as the TOWEL, that give a standardized score, but the test itself is specific to writing. So just be aware that, as with math, there are some specific tests that just measure that isolated skill, and they can also be evaluated through the use of one of the more generalized assessments as well. So your learning objectives for the chapter are included here in the last several slides. Be sure to look those over before taking your quiz and let me know if you have questions. Thanks for listening and best of luck.